Yes, it finally happened. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was finally announced for the Nintendo Switch 2, but what caught me and a lot of other people by surprise is that not only is it coming to the Nintendo Switch 2, it's also coming to the original Nintendo Switch. We're gonna get into that and why maybe that's not the best idea. But first, the like button is feeling kinda lonely, so do me a solid and hit that real quick. Don't get me wrong, I'm not surprised that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is capable of running on the OG Switch. I'm not surprised about that at all. The basic gameplay of it, like the foundation of it, that was already present on the PlayStation Portable 15 years ago with Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Tag Team. I used to play the hell out of that game way back in the day. That's a system, the PSP, that's a system that is orders of magnitude weaker than the original Nintendo Switch. So I'm not surprised at all to see it up and running on it. But I am shocked that they actually went through the trouble of porting it because, well, at this point, I just don't see how it's gonna do very well with the Switch 1 being on its way out. Take a look at Guilty Gear Strive, for example. They pretty much sent that game out to die on the original Switch. On the other hand, the Switch 2 has already become the fastest selling video game system ever, and so more exclusives coming to the Switch 2 is, I think, the way to go. But I can't lie and say that I'm not curious about trying it out on my Switch 1. I definitely am gonna be doing that. I'm gonna be giving both versions a try and letting you know how it goes. But first, we already have some comparisons, so let's take a look at some of the differences between Switch 1, Switch 2, and even PlayStation 5. One thing I was a little bit disappointed by in the trailer is that it looks like they mixed Switch 1 and Switch 2 footage in it. In what was supposed to be a Switch 2 focused Nintendo Direct a few days ago, so it was kind of jarring to see gameplay for the Switch 1 version because it looked noticeably downgraded, and it wasn't made clear during the Direct that it was also going to release on the Switch 1, and if it was, then I must have missed it because I didn't know. I didn't know that it was gonna come to the Switch 1 until I watched the standalone trailer that Nintendo released for it after the Direct. But with the footage that we saw in the Direct, a lot of people thought that that was the Switch 2 version, and what they showed was a pretty bad looking game, for Switch 2 standards anyway. But here we can see roughly a better representation of the differences between the Switch 2 and Switch 1 versions of Sparking Zero. So it looks like for the Switch 1, background environments received a huge downgrade where pretty much everything got stripped down and a lot of detail was lost or just outright changed. I wouldn't say that the designs look bad though. The buildings in the background still have that Dragon Ball style to them. Everything still has that Dragon Ball aesthetic, but obviously the backgrounds were stylized differently for the Switch 1 version. Again, this is what they should have done for Mortal Kombat 1 instead of what they actually did, but that's neither here nor there. Character models in the Switch 1 version are missing a lot of detail and are noticeably lower resolution, but they still look pretty decent when you consider that it's on the OG Switch. In addition to the degraded graphics, the Nintendo Switch 1 will also run at 30 frames per second, which is not surprising. But, and in what came as a shocker to me, is that according to the Bandai Namco official Sparking Zero Switch page, the Switch 2 version is also gonna run at 30 frames per second. I really don't get that at all. The Switch 2 should be more than capable of running this game at 60 frames, so that is kind of disappointing. I'm hoping that it was probably a rush job and that they'll eventually patch the Switch 2 version to play at 60 frames. You know, I used to say that I couldn't tell the difference between 30 and 60, but once you played games at 60 frames per second and then you play the same game at 30, it really is a big difference visually, and especially when you're talking about a fighting game. Maybe their reason for doing this is to retain parity between Switch 1 and Switch 2 so that we can play online together, because remember, Switch 1 has a huge install base. And in comparison, Switch 2 just came out, so maybe that was a factor. in their decision. At least that's what I thought at first, but according to Bandai Namco, there actually is no crossplay between Switch 1 and Switch 2. Making this game run at 30 on the Switch 2 is a major oversight that I hope gets corrected. Regardless, I will be buying this game, and I am gonna make it a point to buy physical anytime that I can. So the good thing about the Switch 1 version is that it's gonna have the full game on the cartridge with what I'm assuming is gonna be a free upgrade for the Switch 2 version. So I'm gonna be buying the Switch 1 physical copy and just playing it on my Switch 2 with the update. I'm gonna hold out a little hope for a 60 FPS patch though. Let me know what you guys think. Is this a game that's on your radar? And if so, which Nintendo console are you gonna be picking it up on? I'm SwitchPlayed, done.